Welcome, welcome. Today we begin our last philosopher, Jean-Paul Sartre, who, as you can see from this, lived from 1905 to 1980. So, for some of us, that wasn't all that long ago. Sartre himself, he was a French novelist, playwright, and exponent of existentialism, a philosophy which claimed the freedom of the individual human being. Freedom is fundamental, as we'll see here in just a few minutes. He was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1964, but he declined it, said no thank you. His works include his first novel, Nausea, which is an intriguing title. We read that in my undergraduate class. And his main philosophical work, Being and Nothingness, which is a beast. The article that we're reading, Existentialism and Humanism, was first delivered as a lecture. And while it is not a definitive statement of existentialism, it does represent a good starting point. Okay? Now, Sartre notes that existentialism has a reputation for being rather crude, morose, and pessimistic. He also notes that many who use the term didn't know what the heck it meant, and many have had trouble defining it. But Sartre does give us an easy characterization, which we'll come to in just a few minutes. But what complicates this characterization is that he divides existential up into two basic groups. The theistic, which Kierkegaard we talked about earlier, and atheistic, which with himself included in that group. Okay? Then, what they all have in common is that they take the Cartesian cogito as their starting point. That is, human subjectivity. Okay? Remember how Kierkegaard said that how the individual transcends the universal. That's that whole encounter, the personal, the infinite passion of the inwardness and all that. That is very much the human subjectivity there. We're going to start with some basic principles and concepts. The first of those is the method of existentialism is phenomenology. Now, think back to that last lecture. We talked about this introduction, about how phenomenology was their method. But, here I want to offer up perhaps a bit more of a clear example. I gave the example of swimming pool before. But, I don't know if anyone watches The Simpsons anymore. It's been on television forever. But, a lot of times animated cartoons are a great way to illustrate the phenomenology of experience. I just stuck in my head years ago. I remember this one episode where Bart Simpson had forgotten to get his permission slip for a field trip signed. So the entire way walking to school, this rain cloud hung over his head and rained on him. It was everything else was sunshiny around him. But that was just his experience in that moment, right? That's a wonderful phenomenological kind of moment right there. So, but let's put existentialism and phenomenology also in many ways into its historical context. And writing it back to that first lecture, we note that it is a rebellion against systematic, of any kind, rationalistic philosophy. Specifically, its reaction against Humean empiricism, right? For Hume, the mind is a passive receiver of sense data and the mind organizes it. Well, for Sartre, this is an interactive thing, right? The mind and the world are mutually creative of one another. It's not just the mind is a passive receiver. The mind is an active engager. Okay? It's also a reaction against rationalism, the subject-object dichotomy. He also notes that look, okay, they are mutually dependent and there is no separating the two. Without a subject, there is no object. Without an object, there is no subject. A subject requires an object. Okay? It's also a reaction against metaphysics. That is, Sartre does ontology, which is descriptive rather than explanatory. That's the first one. Second, this is the big one, y'all. Existence precedes essence. Existence comes from the root existere, which means to stand out from, to step out, or to stand forth, to emerge, perhaps. And it's a realization of our own nothingness, to be free. But then when it comes to essences, that in essence, in making choices, we create our own essence, an individual essence. So the human being is born as nothing, and then we create ourselves by the choices that we make. Our essence is an individual thing, not an essence in the traditional, not in the Cartesian sense, or even in the Christian sense of having a soul. Instead, it's what we create through our choices. Okay? The third, you know yourself through the other as contrast. We talked about this last time also. You know, if it were not for you, I would not be exactly who I am now. We define ourselves, we know ourselves through others, we know ourselves as contrast. Without others to define us, we would be no thing. Fourth, radical freedom, radical responsibility. I'm not going to go over this one again, but this was from the last lecture too, this notion of radical freedom, that we are radically free, and that also with that comes responsibility for everything as well. Note that all of this is in direct conflict with most of traditional philosophy. And that's our preliminaries. Let's now begin Sartre's ontology specifically. Sartre divides the world up into two modes of being for itself and being in itself. Briefly and quickly, being for itself is consciousness, the human experience. Being in itself is everything else. Objects, it can also sometimes be people, persons, or bodies, if you want to. But basically, being for itself, that first synonym right there will help us get the basics of it, consciousness. And we're going to explain being for itself by giving synonyms for it. Okay? This first one, consciousness. What I have here on the slide, the self as consciousness is systematically elusive. It becomes something it is not by the time you become aware of it. I know that that's not incredibly illuminating, not very clear, but let me see if I can put it like this. Okay. I hold in my hand here my PowerPoint clicker. Okay. I can be aware of it. I can be aware of the fact that I'm aware of it. I can be aware of the fact that I'm aware of the fact that I'm aware of it. But the one thing I can never be aware of is that thing that's doing the awaring. That's the consciousness, right? I can also, if I become aware of my own consciousness, I have to convert that into an object, but then it's no longer the awareness itself, but it's not what it was before. So the thing that we can never be aware of is the thing that's doing the awaring. Because there's always this thing right there, the pre-reflective cogito, he calls it at some point, right? That's always doing the awaring, that never itself is an object of awareness, but it's always what's doing the awaring. That's why we say it's systematically elusive. It becomes something it's not by the time you become aware of it, because what it is, it's no thing, it's the awaring of things. So in order to be aware of it, I have to be back on the level. I hope that's clear. If not, we can get this in our conversation following this class. Okay. That's the first one. I hope we got that. The second, transcendence. Humans are the only animals, as far as we know, that transcend our own ego and question our own existence and our universe. This questioning presupposes that we are separate from our existence and our universe, and that we don't really know. Okay, think, for example, about animals that we know quite well, like a dog. A dog never wonders whether or not she exists. Do I exist? They are their existence. I mean, they are their being. They are their awareness. They are their world. They're constantly, they can never stop and contemplate. Am I really in my existence? They can never doubt their existence the way Descartes tried to do, for example. Okay? The fact that we can do that implies that we're somehow separate from our existence, that we can transcend our world and ourselves. Whereas a dog lives just in the immediate. Okay? Third, existence. Existere, as we noted before. Check this out. Only humans exist. Things and animals just are. Okay. Let me see if I can do this. Think about, for example, I have the example here, squirrels and paper cutters, because for Sartre, there's no essential difference between the two. That is, a squirrel has an essence, and it is completely defined by that essence. A squirrel cannot do non-squirrel things. It will only and always do squirrel things. When the springtime comes, it will begin nesting. It will begin nesting for mating season. When the winter comes, it will gather nuts. It can't do otherwise. A squirrel can't not be squirrely. Okay? It has that defined essence to do squirrel things. They can't commit suicide. They don't. A paper cutter is the same way. It's thoroughly defined in its being. Its essence is there. Its essence is to cut paper. A squirrel's essence to do squirrel things. Guess what? That ain't true for us. There is nothing that we have to do. Nothing. A squirrel isn't going to starve itself to death on a hunger strike. People can. We can go to work, we can get a job, we cannot get a job. I can live under a bridge. I cannot live, we don't have those things that make us essentially what we are because there is no essentialness to us. Okay? Remember, the surest way to get a teenager to do something is to forbid them. Humans. This guarantees our freedom, by the way. Existence precedes essence. Okay? Sartre puts himself, as we noted, in the atheistic camp. That is, he is thoroughly in the camp that says God is dead. This quotation from the essay. Atheistic existentialism, of which I am a representative, declares with greater consistency that if God does not exist, there is at least one being whose existence comes before its essence, a being which exists before it can be defined by any conception of it. That being is man, or, as Heidegger has it, the human reality. What do we mean by saying that existence precedes essence? We mean that, first of all, man exists, encounters himself, surges up in the world, and defines himself afterwards. If man, as the existentialist sees him, as not definable, it's because to begin with he is nothing, no thing, no object. He will not be anything until later, and then he will be what he makes of himself. Thus, there is no human nature because there is no God to have a conception of it. Man simply is. Not that he is simply what he conceives himself to be, but he is what he wills, and as he conceives himself after already existing, as he wills to be after that leap towards existence. Man is nothing else but that which he makes of himself. That is the first principle of existentialism. That is existence precedes essence. By the way, this is what I'll have you guys write about in that assignment at the end. Okay? 4. No thing, no object. We exist in a world full of things that have no meaning, yet there is this creature that exists and knows that he is, at the same time is not. This causes anguish, which we define right now as being afraid of what you are or of what you could be. When we are no object, this refers to the nothingness that is the pre-reflective, that is the being for itself. Okay? We are, but yet we desire to be. Okay? That is, when it says that we exist, that means we are choosing things. We are existere. So that we, as we make our choices, we create our own essence. Yet at the same time, that essence is never finished. So we are and we are not. We are because we've made some choices, We are not in that we ain't finished yet. You're never completely defined until after you are dead. So this anguish, being afraid of what you are, that's afraid of your being, okay, or of what you could be, your nothingness. 5. Freedom. According to Sartre, the human is a vacant point who has to make constant choices of how he views the outside world. So, look, everything we do implies a choice, even if it's not explicit. And we're constantly choosing how we view the world. What do we make of it? Because of this, we are free and we are nothing. Because of that, we experience anguish. Remember, that we just defined that a moment ago. Okay? Anguish takes two forms: anxiety, which reveals our nothingness, and nausea, which reveals our somethingness, or living like an object. And again, this was the title of Sartre's first novel. Okay? We might even describe that sort of as the feeling that we've used up our freedom, that we've just become completely an object. Okay? Note that authentic people experience both. But we don't like it. Okay? So sometimes we attempt to flee anguish. Okay? The flight from anguish is what Sartre calls bad faith, or in our translation, I believe in theirs translated self-deception. French is mauvaise foi. It's a lie to oneself. Okay? Now, just as anguish takes two forms, so the flight from anguish takes two forms as well. The flight from anxiety is into sincerity, or what we call bad faith in the mode of being in itself. Note that nothingness. That flight into somethingness, The flight from anxiety into sincerity, because we flee from nothingness into somethingness. And examples of this, he notes that this is typically characteristic of older people, right? It's the flight into being. You hear people say, well, that's just the way I am. I can't change now. Why did you do that? Well, because I'm a Christian. Well, guess what? You chose that too. The idea of blaming who you are on someone or something else, that is this mode of bad faith. Okay? Blaming who you are on something else or someone else and not taking responsibility for yourself, that's just the way I am. Some people, you'll see people take on identities of various kinds, and that begins to define what they are and who they're doing, then they can blame that. That's bad faith too. Okay? Sartre uses the example on page 6 and 7. He sets it up on page 6 about the young man who's trying to figure out, should he join the resistance or should he stay with his poor mother and take care of her? How could he choose on this? He says, who could help him choose? Could the Christian doctrine? No, the Christian doctrine says act with charity, love your neighbor, deny for others, choose which is hardest, and so forth. But which is the harder road? To whom does one owe brotherly love, the patriot or the mother? Which is the more useful aim, right? Who can give? There is no a priori answer. Okay? Now, on that next page, on page 7, he talks about how, look, okay, what do? You go ask for counsel, right? They say that the youth go to professor for advice. But suppose you seek counsel from a priest, for example. You have selected that priest. Okay? At the bottom, you already knew more or less what he would advise. In other words, to choose an advisor is nevertheless to commit oneself to that choice. If you're a Christian, you will say, consult a priest. But there are collaborationists, the collaborationists, priests who are resistors, and priests who wait for the tide to turn. Which will you choose? choosing the kind of priest you choose is partly to make your choice. Okay? So, a lot of times when you have a good friend that you call for advice, you know what they're going to say, but yet you call them anyway because you just need to hear it, perhaps. But when you choose to ask someone, you still choose the advisor. Okay. Let's go back to this sincerity. Someone who is in this mode needs a good dose of nausea. That is, they need to realize that they become something, that they've given up their freedom. Okay? Oh, God, look at what I've become. So that they can then become a free chooser. On the other hand, the flight from nausea is the flight into non-being, or bad faith in the mode of being for itself. Now, this is frequently characteristic of younger folks, right? Those who live in a future possible state of themselves. You just wait. One day I'm gonna. I knew this guy many years ago. He was sort of a bit of a slacker, ne'er-do-well kind of guy, who actually lived from month to month on these medical check-in places where they do drug testing, drug test studies on you and stuff like that. They would pay him for this, so he would have a free place to stay for a while and get a big check of money, then come out. But he carried a stack full of notebooks around with him, right? And these were his ideas. He was an idea man, and he would say, "One day I'm gonna, one day I'm gonna, one day I'm gonna," and would never do it. You finally want to say, "Damn it, Randy, just do it," right? Just do it. Become something. And so they never resolve to be anything now. They're always living in this future possible state of themselves. This person needs to face their nothingness to experience anxiety. Okay? Note the circle, right? They can go back and forth. Just as Sartre talks about bad faith, so he also talks about good faith. Good faith is resolving to be, considering your facticity. That facticity, that is your whole set of things. That is your being. That's those choices you've made to become who you are and what limits you and all that, right? Choosing your facticity. Resolve to be, considering your facticity. I choose the future in the face of it. A person in good faith would ask for evidence before he believes. Bad faith looks for it afterwards. Good faith wants to take into account what's there, while realizing the value put there is put there by the individual. Note that we have no choice over our total situation, but we do have choice in our responses to it and the value we give it. Think for this good faith and bad faith thing. Think about the two types of college students. The one who is here, just has his eye on the prize, on the final ticket, and misses the real college experience. That's living in the bad faith, the mode of being for itself, right? Look, okay, because they aren't anything. They're living that future possible state, and they're missing the moment. On the other hand, someone who becomes the eternal college student, dwells in this, never thinks about what's next, and just does the big college thing, and doesn't plan at all. This is what they've become. I am the college student, right? Note the middle way. The middle way would be to recognize where you are, to look at the future, look towards it, but yet to also enjoy the now, enjoy the moment. Get something out of this and look to that. That's good faith. By the way, this is not a moral category. This is descriptive. 6. Destruction. Refusing to allow the other to exist when my world is in control. Now, we talked about how the being for itself is transcendence. Okay? But notice this. Any transcendence, qua-transcendence, requires an object to be aware of it. Okay? A subject requires an object and vice versa. So that when you and I are talking to one another, we can never meet both of us as transcendences. One of us has to make the other one into an object in order to be aware of them. This is always true because I can't see you as subject, but rather I require an object to be aware of something. Okay? So in order for me to be aware of anything, I must make that something into an object, including another person. Okay? Now, to be, in order to be aware of anything, I must, okay, now, so, let me get my story here. Sometimes when I'm alone, I reach that point where I'm engaged in deep revelry, lost in thought, and I'm not limited to my body in that moment. Remember the phenomenology here, right? I lose my awareness of my confines, for example, and in my favorite place, experiencing reverie. I mean, do you have such a place? I'm sure most of us do. I hope you do. We can go just get lost in your thought and let your mind roam and wander and not even be aware of the world around you. Now, in such a situation, your world is your own, but all it takes is the interjection of another to bring you back to your body. Boom, something like that. Or your cell phone ringing, clanging off, right? A knock at the door, a branch banging at the window, a horn honking outside. Anything that intrudes can send you back to your body. Okay? Now, let's imagine this situation. You know what? Let's take ourselves back to our classroom for just a minute. Pick a student. And if we were there, I would probably pick Anna Marie. But I don't know if I want to do that on this public forum or not. But nonetheless, if that would make you feel better, we'll do that. I hope you don't mind. I'm not going to pick on you again. But let's set up the situation. Okay? Here we go. She's a good student, whichever she you conceive of here. And she came to class early to make sure she has her reading done, everything's ready to go, and she's been there long enough that her world is in control. She's lost her outsides. Her transcendence is floating about the room. But me, your dedicated professor, I show up too. And I'm coming in to make sure that my chalk is well stocked. You know how much I like that, right? But as I walk in the room, suppose I look over and I see her, and there she is, picking her nose. Her finger is buried up that second knuckle, up that right nostril. She's going for it. Now, I see her. What do I do? Well, I don't want to disturb her. I don't want to be rude. I'm a nice guy, right? So I'm just going to try to sneak out. And lo and behold, I accidentally kick the trash can. Boom! All of a sudden, her world collapses down. And the first thing, when our transcendence is transcended in an unwelcome fashion, you have the look. Picture our eyes meeting. Boom! Right there. The look. The look. Boom. Right there. Okay? The first thing one feels when looked at is shame. Be careful here. Shame is not a moral category. It's being aware of how the other views you. The other becomes your subjectivity. Shame is the recognition that I am as the other views me. You do appear as the other sees you. Now, in this moment, here we are. Our eyes are locked. In that moment, okay, of the look, 7 things happen. First is the fall. Okay, you were about the room, and now you have fallen. Second, she has an outside. She didn't before. She was not limited to her confines. But her experience is no longer her own. She's drawn to my world as an object. She's deprived of her freedom. Her transcendence has been transcended. Lo, she is an object. All of this happens right there in that split moment. Okay? Now, there are at this point 2 responses. Sadism and masochism. That's the topic for the day. A masochist willingly gives up her freedom. Sartre notes that this is actually a typical female response. Sexist pig, but nonetheless. She becomes an object before the view of the other. A masochist is an object willingly and unreflectively. Okay? And love is a desire to be an object for the other. It's an awareness of being an object. Okay? On the other hand, sadism is wanting the other to be an object in your control. Notice this. Desire and love are opposites. When you desire someone, you want them to be your object. When you love someone, you want to be their object. Okay? Think about when you first meet someone that you're interested in, that you think might love you. Think about how we try to, at least that's what we used to do, right? I bet we still do, that we try to find those things that they find interesting in us. We work to highlight them. We want to make those come to the fore for them to be aware of them, to accent them in some way, so we can become their desirable object. Okay? Note that because of all of this, all human relationships are based in conflict. All of them. Even when we are casually conversing. Okay? So I'm talking, transcending, you're the object that then you want to process, so you don't then know. We just go back. It can be congenial even, but still, all human relations are based in conflict. Okay? And sometimes I think that professors, teachers generally are masochists, because you students can be mean. I've had students do things to me in class that just had me confubbed. One time I went back to my high school class when I was in college, undergraduate school, after I studied existentialism in my class. I went back to do the lecture to my honors English class because they didn't really quite understand it, but I did, I thought, or I probably did. But the first time I did, a student came in and he just before the bell rang, he had his jacket on, he never took it off, and he stared at the clock the entire time. I couldn't break him. That's horrible. That's horrible. And things like that just make us into objects. I'll have some more story about this. I'll tell when we meet in the teams thing. Okay. But notice this also. Love is doomed to fail. I mean, love is a desire to become a desirable object for the other. That's what I want to do. To find out, I must transcend you. But our transcendences can never meet. So we invented God, Sartre says, to make us both into objects simultaneously, to allow love to succeed. There you go. That, by the way, is being for itself. Being in itself. This will be very brief. It's giddy. It's neither active nor passive. It simply is what it is. There is no inside or outside. It's absolutely contingent, neither possible nor necessary. Okay. By the way, possible and necessary requires being for itself, because being for itself has potentialities. And so it just is what it is. Period. It's superfluous. One of an infinite number of appearings, overflowing with itself. Okay. It's objects. Everything that is. It's the universe. The universe is like a prostitute. You pay your money and you get what you want. Sartre addresses morality in this piece a little bit. Notice this. He notes, quoting Dostoevsky, if God doesn't exist, then everything is possible. In spite of the fact that there are no objective moral standards, all of our actions are subject to moral judgment. Why? Well, there's one moral principle. This word has more syllables than letters. The principle of universalizability. Interesting. Since there is no human nature, my choice is a choice for all. When I act for all of humanity. And here's the relevant quotation here. Certainly many people, this is from page 4, by the way, think in what they're doing they commit no one but themselves to anything. And if you ask them, what would happen if everyone did so? they shrug their shoulders and reply, everyone does not do so. But in truth, one ought always to ask what would happen if everyone did as one is doing. No one can escape from that disturbing thought except by a kind of self-deception. The man who lies in self-excuse by saying, everyone will not do it, must be ill at ease in his conscience, for the act of lying implies universal value which it denies. Notice this then. When you choose for all. Because there is no human nature, every time I act, I'm saying, this is what it means to be human. I'm defining my essence and thereby acting for all of humanity. This, by the way, is a serious responsibility. Okay? We're going to conclude this part with what I call Sartre's 6 facts of existence. Okay? And some of these look like they are almost like paradoxes. We are as we behave, yet we can never be reduced to what we've done until when we are dead. That's being and nothingness right there. Okay? We are our situation, yet responsible for our situation in the way that we deal with it. I like this one. Human behavior and thought are determined by our original choice, which is the desire to be, yet this drive is irrational. Okay, we have the desire to be, yet we're fundamentally nothingness. Therefore, this is irrational. 4. As we just saw, our every act is subject to moral judgment, yet there are no objective moral standards. 5. Our fundamental relationship with other people is conflict, yet we can only come to be before the view of the other. We're in conflict, yet we have to have them to become what we are. Okay? And finally, we in our world have an irrational origin, yet salvation lies in the rational recognition of this. There you go. Your assignment. Sartre claims that existence precedes essence. This implies that there is no human nature. It also, he says, guarantees human freedom. Define this existence precedes essence more fully. Do you agree? Do we have no human nature beyond what we create for ourselves? And I could go and ask, what does this mean for religion, other things like that, but we're going to leave that up to you to explore that, okay? All right, kids, wash your hands. Bye.